Hello, I'm back in my studio and I'm here to talk about my brand new board game that we have designed that is debuting at the UK Games Expo 2024. Yes, we are at the UK Games Expo at the end of May, which is happening in 1 week. So you may very well be watching this after that's happened, but don't panic. The game will be floating about. I will post below in other cons and things that we'll be going to and other ways that you may be able to play it, as well as the Kickstarter link, which is currently on the pre-launch page. We don't know when we're going to be launching yet, but the pre-launch page is up, so you can save it and keep an eye on the project. So here you can see the board laid out. This is the Tempus ship. You can see that dominates the board here. The latest advanced technology in space exploration. It also happens to be a time machine. However, the first mission has gone horribly wrong, and the ship has got an array of problems going on with it that players will have to fix in order to be able to pilot it safely home. The gimmick being that the players can always activate the time drive at the front of the ship and transport themselves back to the beginning of the game when things get too tough, resetting the board and trying again with the added knowledge of the order and location that the disasters are going to happen, so they can hopefully preemptively fix things and maybe win the game. During board setup, you'll have placed these numbered tokens in every location on the board, every room location dotted about, not including the bridge, and you'll have placed these item cards in fixed locations at the start of the game. Players will then draw a hyperdrive card, a card that determines what kind of disaster is befalling them. This will determine how much damage goes on the card itself, and then any additional effects that happen on the board. The objective of the game is then to remove all of the effects that are on the actual hyperdrive card so that you can flip it over and then pilot the ship home. I'll go into more details about how precisely that works in a moment. The other few bits of setup that we have is that you have the disaster deck. This is a deck of things that will affect the board, namely fires, electrical faults, damage. There will be lockdowns that cause the doors to lock on you. And then we have wounds as well that, again, may be triggered by these effects. These each have a design so that they are incremental. So the more players you have, between 2 and 5 players, the more players, the more effects that take place as the ship is straining to try and keep more people alive. In addition to that, you have the paradox deck. Now, time travel is a tricky beast. So every time that you do it, you may well cause a paradox, or at least you will definitely add a paradox to the disasters deck. When these come up, they happen almost immediately, and they will cause unpredictable effects that will basically affect the very fabric of how the game operates. Eventually, however, players will hit the Lost in the Void card. When that happens, the game is over. They have reached their time travel limit. The ship blinks out of existence along with them in it. And lastly, we have the ship's damage track, a general track keeping an eye on how damaged the ship is overall. If that ever reaches the end, the ship explodes and the game is over. But don't worry, those aren't the only 2 ways you can lose the game. There's plenty of others. Luckily, players will draw a character card that gives them a unique power, something that will be vital for them to utilize in order to win the game. It also includes how many wounds they can take before they are dead, as well as the equipment slots for the 2 things they can carry and the 1 thing they can wear from the item around the board. Some of these do vary. They may have more wounds. They may have missing some of the slots for equipment or their wearing. But the abilities are all pretty unique and pretty essential to master. And once setup is complete, the players are ready to go. Each round will begin in the action phase. Now, players can choose who goes first in a round, but then turn order will proceed clockwise. This will make it a strategic choice later in the game as to what order they need to do things in order to trigger their effects most efficiently. On their turn, each player can move twice and then perform an action. They have to be done in that order unless their character's power states otherwise. Actions can be anything from picking up equipment, using the equipment, using one of the bridge consoles to perform a specific action, or trading items between each other. You can also take the trade action to simply swap everyone's items around if everybody is in your space. In addition, a couple of locations on the board also have actions you can utilize, such as sick bay, where you can use to heal yourself. Item cards will have 1 or more action, ability, or reaction on them. An ability is an ongoing effect, but a reaction is something that you can trigger, usually requiring you to discard the card in order to prevent something happening on the board. For example, you can discard a fire extinguisher to prevent a fire from being placed in your space. Fires and electrical faults will wound players as they appear in their space, but the other effects to keep track of is that fires place damage and prevent you from being able to take actions in their space because of all the smoke and chaos. Electrical faults, if you get 2 in the same location, will cause a fire, and they will also, if there are too many electrical faults on the board, it will rapidly increase the Tempus's damage track as the ship begins to short circuit. Electrical faults that appear in rooms with activation effects or on the bridge as well will block those spaces from being able to be used because they are malfunctioning. On top of that, if a fire appears in a space with a fire, that fire will then spread into every other space, potentially spreading even further, triggering through one fire to the next, to the next, to the next, and spreading all the way around the board if such a thing were to happen. This is why you may wish to manually place locked doors in order to close them off so that fire can't get round corners. The last thing to mention is damage. Damage will appear on the board, particularly from fires, but from other effects as well. 1 damage has no immediate effect, but 2 damage in a space means that a player has to spend 2 movement to enter that space. 3 or more damage in a space means that a player cannot leave that space. It's just too busted up for them to be able to get out. And on top of that, the damage is a limited supply. There is only around 30 damage at the start of the game. And if all of it's on the board, and the ship just collapses in on itself and the game is over. You're probably going to want to leave a player near the bridge, partly because you always want the option to perform a time drive. The game is extremely difficult to win in one run. But the bridge also has other effects. For example, at the security controls, you can place or remove locked doors. The damage report you can activate to look through the disaster discard pile to remind yourself of the order that things are going to happen in. The shield controls, you can remove electrical faults by rerouting them through the shield, thus increasing the Tempus's damage track. And the flight controls, well, you need that to win the game. Somebody at least near the bridge able to run in and quickly activate those powers, or indeed jump to the time drive to save you from ultimate destruction, is probably a good call. When a player at the time drive triggers a time jump, you clear all the disasters from the board, replace the equipment, meaning that the players get to keep the equipment they've picked up and a new selection of equipment gets put out on the board. This allows them to pick up more things, as there's only one of everything, with the exception of fire extinguishers, there's only one of every item on the board. If you need more than one of a particular item, you're going to have to do a time jump in order to cheat the system, essentially, and get a new one out. You would then add the top paradox card to the top of the disaster deck so that it triggers later, and put the disaster discard pile, without changing its order, back on top of the deck, so that you know that the same disasters are going to happen in the same order. Flip over the hyperdrive card if it has been flipped, reenact all of its effects, and then begin a brand new round. In a standard setup, the paradox deck is 4 cards deep, meaning you can perform 4 time jumps before you will run out of cards and therefore can't time jump anymore. In addition, obviously, the last time jump card will cause the Lost in the Void effect if it ever comes up in the disaster deck. So if you're doing the 4th one, you want to make sure that you're going to have enough time before it triggers to win the game. Once the hyperdrive has been fixed, the players have to do things in a specific order. They must go to the shields to activate the ship's shielding rays. They must go to securities to force a lockdown, and then somebody must go to flight controls and pilot them home. So fixing the hyperdrive isn't a guaranteed win. You can fix the hyperdrive and then things can go horribly wrong, and you may have to time jump before you get a chance to do those 3 activations. In addition, all players need to be alive in order to win the game, and otherwise it will cause a major paradox. So if any of the players are dead at the end of the game, not only do the players have to activate the shields, the security, and the flight controls, they also first have to activate the time drive in order to bring that player back to life. There's kind of a push your luck element to it. You want to learn as much as you can about the future, but the disasters can very quickly ramp up. And I've seen players underestimate just how much they can push that luck. Just think, oh, if we can just get one more round, see one more card, and then the ship just flat out explodes on them and they out of nowhere. So if you're ever concerned that you might need to time jump, you probably need to time jump. Once actions have been taken, players must enter the end of round phase. Now the end of round phase has a few effects. If the fuel cells have 3 damage and a fire, the ship explodes. That would be a game-ending event. If the life support has 3 or more damage on it, then every player will take a wound as the life support isn't working. If the airlock has 3 or more damage on it, it may well bust open, sucking everything out of the ship, which is bad. Being sucked out into the depths of space is not a good thing. All fires on the board will place damage. If there are more than 3 electrical faults on the board, then the Tempus's damage track will increase. On top of that, there may well be additional cards in play, perhaps paradoxes, that cause end of round effects. You'll have to check depending on what you've got in the go. But if the players have survived the end of round phase, they get to move on to the disaster phase. They draw the top card of the disaster deck and enact its effects up to and including the number of players active. For example, in a 3-player game, you would enact the first 2. In a 5-player, all of them. But if in a 2-player game, it would just be the top one. These will primarily place electrical faults and fires, but may have other effects, such as locking all of the doors. These reference the number tokens on the board that I mentioned during setup. The reason we have this is because instead of just saying the locations on the board, is that the number token system allows us for maximum variability. It's not possible to card count, and also allowed us to reduce this deck from like 160 cards down to about 20. So yeah, that just creates maximum variability once you randomize which locations are. Also, when the players are able to look through this deck to check where things are happening, it adds just that little extra layer of confusion when it's called location 8 instead of life support. Once they've activated their disaster, if there happens to be a paradox card on top of the deck because they've performed a time jump once already, then they will draw that and enact its effects as well. After all that, if the game hasn't been lost, then the players start a new round choosing another first player and going clockwise, taking turns in order. So that's 7 ways to lose and only 1 way to win, as all good, deeply intense co-op games should have. There's a few other details, but that gives you a basic overview of the game. If you are at the UK Games Expo next weekend, please do come by and play the game. We are in Hall 2, stand 799A, but we may well be coming to another convention or gaming club near you soon as we promote the game throughout the year. Follow our Kickstarter at the link below. Also join our Facebook page and other social medias to keep track of where we are and what we're doing. I'll also put links below for my brother Liam's, all his website and all his other details below. He did all the graphic design on this. Everything you're looking at here was designed by him. All the cards and sheets and the board, obviously, and everything else. So yeah, that's all his graphic design work. So yeah, check out those links below. Like this video if you're intrigued by that. Subscribe to my channel if you don't already. Check out all my other videos. This is the big project we're working on at the moment, but there's other things coming out and other things that I'm working on. But yeah, other than that, thank you for watching. This has been a real labour of love for a good 10 years now. First started working on this 10 years ago, and it's just sort of slowly been piecemealed together over the last decade. But yeah, now we are ready, more or less ready to launch. So here we go. Thank you for watching. The end.